what an amazing time to be in technology. I say this at the end of almost every presentation. As a researcher, my whole role is to figure out what's coming next. I live in disruption. You guys are talking about DevOps. We listened to Gene Kim today talk about that. I'm focused on no ops. How scary is that? Raise your hand. Is that the idea of no ops? Is that scary at all? Let's get vulnerable in here. It is scary, right? You have your infrastructure titan saying no ops. I am ops. All I know is ops. And your leaders, can I show of hands? How many leaders in the room? IT leaders? Individual contributors? I mean, that should be scary and exciting for everybody. Each week, you invite me into your conference rooms, and I present trends that are coming. And I say some pretty interesting things. I say things like server automation, serverless, chatbots, security automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning. And as I'm doing it, I'm watching the room. I'm watching the faces take shape. And I start to see certain personalities come. I find my champion. I find my passive, my enthusiast, my detractor, my dependent, my laggards, my skeptic. At some point in time in our career, we've all been there. We've been one of these people. You can think about right now the conference rooms you've sat in listening to this information, and you yourself have probably been one of those people. You might have been the champion. You might have been the laggard. You might have been the skeptic. Oh, that'll never work. Our company never does that. Oh, business would never allow it. It's such an interesting time. Business has taken their dependency upon IT and changed it completely. And now, for the first time in a long time, IT can drive business differentiators. It's said that by 2022, half of the Fortune 500 companies will be completely different. And the reason for that is technology disruption. So how do we deal with this irresistible force of change that's coming? I mean, we all signed up to be in IT, which means we all signed up for constant evolution. We watch it all the time. We wait for it personally in our lives, and we watch it occur in the business. But in our lives, it's exciting. We're getting a new iPhone. We were just talking about this. It's exciting getting a new iPhone. Change. Well, I'm going to run a marathon. That's very exciting. Very exhilarating. But in organizations, when we talk about change, that becomes scary, very scary. And it's the people that are scared about it the most. I read this quote the other day that said, "The most harmful addictions in life are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly salary." So true, right? And because of the human condition for survivability, the idea of the monthly salary will have us hunkering down in the face of change. And as leaders, it is our role to lead and set the tone for that change, for a successful transformation. Because yes, today it's DevOps, tomorrow it's no ops, tomorrow the next day we're not even working, we have implants in our brains, we stay at home, we send our machines out. But the idea is that it's always changing. No matter what the conversation is, it's always changing. So how can you successfully change the mental model to navigate these changes? How can you bring your people along with you to make sure that as you approach each single change, you together are delivering the differentiator for your business? You're keeping your business alive. IT is keeping business alive. We heard yesterday, and even this morning, how a single mind shift can make the differentiator. We've watched over and over again companies that we liked personally in our lives die because they did not keep up with technology. And it will impact your org. Change is hard. And that's really the first part you have to embrace is change is hard. Today, I am fortunate enough to share this stage with Deborah Anthony. She is she's a transformation strategist with HPE and a 2-time CIO. And she's really going to talk about how she transformed the organization over and over again. But before I let her come up here and wow you and let you take notes about what's going on and how you can get your team to the next level, I want to leave you with 5 components that you should think about as a leader as you're embarking on change. Whether that change be small or big, You always have to remember to bring your people first. So the first thing that I think is really important is to inspire for a greater purpose. Oftentimes as leaders, we are in a reactionary mode. It's going to save money. Something's broken. We have to change it. We're in this reactionary mode. And the people who are responsible for the implementation of that only feel the reaction. It's like training our students to pass a test. Yes, in the short term, you can be successful. But in the long term, have you empowered them with the tools to be successful beyond the test? So we really need to focus on creating a deeper sense of meaning for it, beyond the financial, beyond the fixing the problem. And the second thing that I think is really important for leaders to do is to go all in. Oftentimes, if we are forcing change as leader to our people and we are not all into it, bringing everybody along, it's harder to make the hard decisions. It's easier to let the little things go and take the easy path. Sure, you might have to do a headcount reduction. Yes, you will be asking people who have mastered their domain to change their skill set. But if you are not all in, that genuine authenticity will never come through. And the number 3 thing that I think is important is that you enable your people with the skill sets and capabilities they need to be successful beyond the transformation. Again, going back to the idea of not just studying for the test, not just training to the test, giving them the capabilities to be successful, identifying with them what they can and cannot do. You will push them beyond their own limits. And as a result, you will get an inspired individual who is willing to jump in and change your organization with you. And the 4th thing that I think is really important, oh my goodness, the 4th thing I'm forgetting. The 4th thing that I think is really, really important is that you inspire a culture of continuous learning. When Microsoft's CEO decided that they needed to be able to compete in a mobile-first and a cloud-first environment, he realized he had to make some changes in the culture. The culture was a very competitive culture. You had to be the smartest in the room. And everybody came that way. Everybody walked in on a higher stilt than the next person. And as a result, their ears were closed off to learning. As a result, they became the skeptics. They became the ones that would not force change because they already knew it all. And by working with these teams to go in from a competitive to a collaborative standpoint, looking for the opportunity to continuously learn, they've been able to transform the organization. So instilling a culture of continuous learning is key in the leadership transformation. And the 5th and final thing that I think is really important for leaders is that you continue to reinforce the directive, the vision. The vision must be set, and it must be communicated accurately. How I went through this in my own career. I was asked if I could come up with the mission statement for our group. I was not the leader at the time. The leader that asked me to do it, I sat there and I was confused. Gosh, isn't it the leader's role to set the mission? Is it my role to set the mission? My mission would be make more money. Like, I don't know if this is my role. And so I came up with 10 different options. Shouldn't I know the mission? Shouldn't I know my role? Shouldn't I know my job? Shouldn't I know I'm here? I didn't. I presented 10 different options. Hopefully it's good. Maybe I'll get a raise. And after I turned it in, I stood on a very big soapbox just like this, and I thought, well, that is not leadership. The leader needs to set the clear vision and hold people accountable. And it's not just being direct, and it's not just holding people accountable. It's creating an inclusive culture. You know, Steve Kerr, head coach, Golden State, he can be heard asking his players during a game for input. Now you have roped them into the exercise of change, to the exercise of succeeding. And no matter what that change is, because you'll invite me to your conference room this time next year, and I'm going to tell you a whole different set of changes that are going to come. And I'm going to watch different faces in the room pop up and come down. And at the end of the day, the success always depends on the leader. And as individual contributors in this room, you too are responsible for the leading of yourself for that. At some level, we're all leaders, not just followers. So now I'll turn it over to Deborah, who has phenomenal passion for this space. We both were able to connect, and it was within about 5 minutes of conversation back and forth that we knew that we were on the same page here. We knew that transformation, IT transformation, was going to be huge. We feel the people first. We feel the pull of the people. So with that, I'll invite Deborah above.
Thank you, Katherine, for that very warm welcome. I'm not sure that wow is exactly what comes in the middle of my name. I'll start by explaining a little bit about the PhD, only because that usually suggests a high level of academic and not so practical experience. I'm the accidental PhD. You know what BS is, right? MS, more same. We pilot higher and deeper. When I found myself in a technology leadership role by accident, and as a result of that, leading an organization through massive technology to business alignment changes, I discovered that there was a lot of information I didn't have. The technology actually turned out to be the easy part, complicated as it was, and we were dealing with literally bleeding edge technologies. We owned the first of just about everything, and nobody had ever connected them together. So as troublesome as that was, as many breakout boxes as I had, and as many conversations as I had with the Bell telephone tech, the first cable television tech in the area, and the digital guys, that the mux, the switch, and the modem all did the same thing, just at different frequencies. And that all they had to do was track that through those little wires from one point to another. That indeed it was the organizational change, the human change, that was causing me the most challenge. And so I went back, and not only to the institutions I'd come out of, but others, seeking for different answers, and for expertise, and for another voice. Because oftentimes as a leader, as much as you have trust from your organization, and they've asked you to do this, sometimes you're not a prophet in your own land, and it requires that you bring somebody else's voice and somebody else's expertise to the table. When I finished with all of that, and we were successful in changing the organization, I am the only candidate that ever went back to an institution and said, here's all the work I did, here's the original research, and is it okay if we take a degree from that? So that's where the PhD came from. So you've been spending the last 2 days talking a lot about how much this doesn't look like your data center, and how much the technologies have been changing. You've also been listening to a lot of very intelligent people giving you some really good advice about some of the aspects within that technology realm that individually or in silos within your technology organizations are changing and how they need to change. But indeed, it's not just about the data center anymore, because the technology is infused in everything we do. There's probably more compute power in your pocket right now than was in the data center in 1970. And everything that we use today tends to have a lot of compute power to it. If you think about it, if the AC stayed on and all the microchips stopped working, what would happen in this room? Lights go off, air conditioning goes off, the projector goes off, you can't hear me any longer unless I yell. Everything is digital. So what we do as IT people has moved out of the back office where we supported corporate office systems, payroll, procurement, the finance guys. Do you remember when 90% of the people in the world who were the chief technology officers actually held the title of chief financial officer? Why? Because it was the financial systems that the technology was running. Today, it is everything in the business. You and the business are one. It's a symbiotic relationship. And because it is, it changes the way we have to think. Katherine talked about that. When I'm out socially, and I talk to people and I ask them what they do, I find an interesting pattern. Perhaps you can confirm or refute. But invariably, if I'm talking to somebody from IT and I ask them, where they work or what they do, they invariably will start with, I'm from IT. Not what business they work for, not necessarily what industry, but that we're from IT. We see ourselves too much in isolation for this world that now says that we're a part of everything, and that every experience that customers have, irrespective of industry, irrespective of where they are in the world, technology is impacting that experience. So we have a different role to play. We have a different mission and potentially a different vision. Yep. Fat-fingered it. So that from a leadership perspective, that oftentimes makes us feel like we're walking a very fine line, or worse, the tightrope, without a net, in terms of how do we get to a point where we've embraced that symbiotic relationship? How have we changed? Because today still, the business is still beating up on you on a regular basis, right? You're still trying to meet deadlines, or worst case scenario, you're being told, cut the budget, find a way to reduce cost because technology is too expensive. Every time I hear that from one of my customers, I immediately know that the issue on the table is we're not, either as a vendor or you as an IT organization, we're not giving the business what they need because the business has money. And the business is investing money heavily. And if they're not investing in technology, or they're asking you to cut your investment, it's because they aren't getting what they need, because you're infused again in everything they do. And they're not maybe articulating that as well as they need to. So it's a matter of thinking then, again, about how do we lead that, and how do we change that conversation with the customer. This morning, several of the speakers mentioned, the difference between leaders and laggards. And one interesting statistic I read just recently is that whether you're a leader or a laggard in your industry as a business, you are spending the same ratio against your revenue for IT. Same investment, different results. So the question begs, if it isn't about the technology and how much you're spending, what makes the difference? What takes a business to the point where they're kicking ass in their industry and the other competition isn't? And that's hard to ferret out, because if you're one of them, you don't want to talk about what's making you different, what's differentiating you, because you don't want to give away your secrets to the customer. But a lot of it is to do with that mental model that Katherine referred to. The biggest change in the organization, enterprise-wide and in IT, is a mental model shift. Business has to think about IT differently and embrace the fact that you have a piece to the technology they oftentimes think of as business technology, not IT. And IT has to stop thinking inside out and start thinking outside in. You aren't a member, you aren't from IT, you're from the business. You need to be engaged in and understand what the business is trying to do. Worked with a customer in the last 6 months who was working very deep into the technology weeds. One segment of infrastructure organization within a very large corporation, very large infrastructure organization. And on one level, we thought, we're talking to too low in the organization. But I witnessed something that was very, very powerful, because their department leader was going around reminding them of what their company did. And that every time they did something in the technology environment with the infrastructure, and they were moving into software-defined infrastructures in order to save money and to increase agility and flexibility and speed to market. But he didn't talk about those things. He talked about what the company accomplished every time we delivered the type of infrastructure they needed. Mental model shift. And that mental model shift starts at the top with the visionary, with the leader who has to be committed to the vision, but it also has to be a part of the infusion of the thinking on everybody's part, including the technician that's still tweaking a server when the server needs to be tweaked or patched. For some reason, I tend. So business has a supply chain. There's an end-to-end process for going from request for product or service to actual delivery. Jean Kim referred to it just earlier this morning before lunch about the fact that shortening that distance is what business is all about. And he talked about DevOps as a way of mirroring that. I'm going to push you farther and say it's not that you need to mirror it in the way you do processes. You need to think about how you are an IT value chain that enables that on the part of the business. That's what shortens the distance or improves the experience. That you think about yourself as something that symbiotically runs in concert with the business's supply chain. Because there isn't any one link probably in that chain that doesn't depend on something digital. Whether you supply it or the business unit is going outside of IT to procure and labeling it business technology and not inviting you to help manage it. And that not managing it, from your perspective, immediate thought probably is, they're taking away my space. Okay? But more importantly, it creates a disconnect in the supply chain because you don't understand all of the places where technology has to integrate with business process and vice versa. It's a lose-lose proposition. There is no win-lose between business and IT. Only win-win or lose-lose. And there's a lot of lose-lose going on out there. The laggards are suffering from a competitive feeling that IT and the business aren't focusing on the same goals. The leaders in their industry have found that they can play a win-win game. That all of the pieces have to fit together. Part of what you can do organizationally inside IT to mirror that is to break down silos. While you still have to organize around expertise, obviously, the people who manage your software-defined infrastructure, the guys that know the OS on one server platform versus another become very important. Different database management systems, very important. The difference, though, is when you bring them in together, because each one of them forms a link in that IT value chain, and you start looking at them and they start seeing themselves as a part of two teams. One that says, I'm a SME, I'm an expert, and I have expert knowledge. And the other team says, I'm a product supporter or a service supporter. That I'm an engineer for the business service or product that is being produced. And it's that mental model and that change in operating model that makes the difference in how well you supply to the business what the business needs. You can still organize the same way. You can still manage in the same kind of organizational chart or not, as you choose. It doesn't have to be as disruptive as it might be. You don't have to throw all the cards up in the air and let them settle down in different buckets if you can change the mental model. Oop, I seem to have a very heavy hand for that. A couple of people today have spoken about the fact that you have to drive out fear. That fear is a huge piece of the resistance to why we as human beings don't like change. that we invest an awful lot in that core, primitive brain portion that says fight or flight. And if I can't run away from it, I'm going to fight it. So one of the things to think about is the fact that you can't move people without addressing that, acknowledging that it's there, that it's part of human nature, and to work at reducing the amount of fear. Fear that your job is going to go away, that addiction to the monthly or weekly paycheck. Fear that you won't be adequate to the needs. As a leadership person, you have to acknowledge that, yes, you may move people around and that not everybody may survive. But if you start with the notion that they will all survive, that there will be a seat on the boat for them if they choose, and that you'll help them keep that, people will come with you and they'll buy into your mission. It's a little bit like crowdsourcing. If you invite them in to be a part of the story, they will do less damage in trying to undermine you. Because as a leadership person, the one thing you know for sure is you are outnumbered. There is no unscarred tissue in my back from having taken 2 different organizations through that kind of change. The first time, I learned as I went. So some of those scars were learning scars. The second time around, I knew they were simply the pain I had to accept and pack up and go. I was very proud of the fact that of the 110 people who were in my direct circle of reports, when I did the second round, and I tried very hard to drive out fear, that I only lost one of them in the end. And my proudest moment was when one of them came to me, having said my first week on the job, that they had already put in their retirement papers, thank you very much, don't ask too much of me for the next 9 months. And I said, that's fine. Everybody makes their choices, and I will support you in that move. Problem became 6 months later when she came back to me and said, can you figure out how to withdraw my request to retire? Because I'm now infused in this, and I want to see it through. But HR tells me that I've already so far along the plot that they're going to let me go. And we were able to secure a spot for her, and she was able to stay. That took a lot of learning. You didn't do it the first time, okay? I lost more people the first time around. But it helped a lot to know at the end, as I then went off and started doing this from a consulting point of view. And when I left that CIO position, I was offered an opportunity to do it a third time, and decided that if I were going to have to build in my own obsolescence, because when you lead that kind of very intense enterprise-wide change, you tend to have to pack up the pain and take it away, that I didn't have enough energy left to do it one more time, and that if I were going to have the obsolescence built in, that I might as well do it from a consulting perspective and perhaps have more impact based on what I'd lived through. But driving out fear is possible. Getting feedback loops from people and helping them understand that they're living through ambiguity, that you're also living through ambiguity, and that nobody has the answers, but that together you can find them. And genuinely keeping that vision alive, but understanding that the vision has different vantage points, different viewpoints, just as the technologies have different components. The perspective on the change has different components, and you want to acknowledge that and to build on it. Anthropologists will tell you that the reason cultures change, that organizations change, that societies change, is because the stories change. So one of the techniques that's most useful, and everybody I've introduced it to comes back and says it's the one piece they never would have thought of on their own, but they found most useful, is to start and take that vision that Katherine was talking about, take the mission, and weave it into the story. Tell the story of who you are now. Talk about who it is you need to be. Do it from both an IT perspective and a business perspective, because both identities are real. The business perspective obviously is the most important. I occasionally would have my technicians come and be very upset over a user group that was giving them a great deal of trouble. And I would have to remind them that if they didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. Because we were the service. We were the people enabling. And unless you're Google or AWS, where the technology is the business, we're still an enabler. As important as we become, that symbiotic relationship that says the business can no longer be without us, we still have an identity of our own, and we are still the service agency. So think about how your story runs today. Ask people to tell you who they think you are as an organization today, and then get them thinking about how they might want to be tomorrow, and see how much of that can align to the vision or the direction you're trying to take them. There's a DevOps story. There's a software-defined infrastructure story. There's a cloud story. There are all these technology chapters. But there has to be a complete story. Those chapters are important. Weave them together into one story for your business, for your organization. Because the story helps you to drive out change. As people see themselves in the story and embrace it, they begin to understand why you're asking them to do specific things. The value to the organization, even when it's not valuable to me as an individual contributor, can influence the way I think. Research says that if you can obviously affect me personally, if you can tell me why it's good for me to take all of this medicine that doesn't taste good, then I'm likely to invest in it. Interestingly enough, the research says that even if that isn't true for me, but you can show me where it's going to be good for the greater good, I will equally invest in it. So it doesn't always have to come down to the individual. If you can get both, you're gold. So the elephant in the room is always the fact that there is that change, the fact that we're living with ambiguity. Katherine mentioned living in interesting times. There's an ancient Chinese curse that literally does translate to, may you live in interesting times. And we do. But it doesn't have to be a curse. Chaos doesn't scale well, but it's fraught with opportunity. So the ambiguity and the opportunities are there. It's how we weave them together. When I think about organizational change, when I think about changing people's mental models and changing the story of an organization, I oftentimes recall a very old joke about the 7 blind guys and the elephant. Perhaps you know it. Yeah. One of them's got the tail, another the trunk. 4 other guys are holding onto these big, large stumps called legs, and each one of them is asked to describe the reality they're holding and guess what it is. And of course, none of them guess correctly because they have limited data. Again, all that good business data analytics we were listening to this morning. Because each has a part of the reality, so you have to validate that. It's important from that perspective, but somebody has to also understand what the whole is. What is that total reality? Whether that's the orchestra conductor that's conducting all of the talented musicians with the best of class instruments, and I oftentimes think of the IT departments that I work with that way. Very talented musicians, best of class technologies, lots of good practice, but unless somebody's telling them what music they're going to play, at what tempo, in what key, the audience isn't going to get a really good experience. So it's all about the whole. It's all about understanding that from a business perspective, outside in, changing your mental model based on that outside in approach, driving out fear, building the story, changing the way you're, and as you change the story around that, then each one of those chapters of where does DevOps fit? Where does cloud fit? Where does software-defined infrastructure? Where do the new security or our big data analytics fit? All of those things then become a part of something larger that makes sense, and most importantly, touches the bottom line. Because as we become the digital enabler, oftentimes my customers say to me, we're preparing for the digital enterprise. And I laugh and I say, I hate to inform you, but it's been around for the last 15 years. One of my customers said, every business will become an IT business. And I said, no. Every organization will become digitally enabled. And every IT organization has to embrace the digital environment of the business. It's the other way around. Because the business and the bottom line and revenue and profit and market share still drive. And if you can generate the knowledge and the information around how your IT organization is changing to enable those key important things, whether you're a government agency or a for-profit agency, if you can tie it directly to that value, you're gold. Because we're needed. But the sad story is that if we, as IT organizations, don't figure out how to be that next generation digital enabler, the business will find somebody who can. They're already taking their American Express card out and contracting for software as a service, cloud services, many of which you either know about or don't know about as IT organizations. So somebody very recently was quoted as saying that as a CIO, their major concern is to make sure that they are taking technology and infusing the ability to improve service and grow capability of the business. And the only way for us to do that is to do the same thing internally. And we tend to traditionally focus on growing it internally. I don't say don't stop doing that, but today we have to do it with the mental model of doing it with a direct line to how that's growing the business and the business's capability. So with that, I will thank you and hope that I've stayed within my time frame, because I can't see the poor gentleman in the back due to the lights who's got the timer. And if we do have time, Paul, we'll open the floor for questions and or stories, because each of you probably has a story to tell. And again, when you're here in this kind of an environment, you learn from each other probably 10 times more than you do from those of us who stand up and speak to you.